To the US now, which is bracing for a different kind of explosion. America is sitting on a giant mountain of debt. If it erupts, the consequences would be disastrous. The US has one of the biggest debt piles in the world. The government owes close to $35 trillion. This is bigger than the US economy. America's GDP is around $28 trillion and their debt is $35 trillion. So America's debt is 123% of its GDP. Clearly, the government is borrowing beyond its means. And it continues to borrow. Whenever the government runs out of cash, it borrows more money, it issues more bonds, but it fails to contain its spending. This is a dangerous trajectory, and now the IMF has sounded an alarm.
Going forward, U.S. fiscal deficit is projected to stay elevated, driving debt to ever-rising heights. That pushes up interest rates and the dollar, contributing to tighter funding costs in the rest of the world.
Allow me to simplify that. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is telling the US that it cannot keep borrowing without limits. Also because this has consequences for the whole world. America's rising debt is pushing up interest rates around the world. It is also raising the cost of loans. So the US will have to find a way to tame its borrowing because it poses a risk to global financial stability, and that is the warning from the IMF. Which brings us to the question, why is it coming now? Why did the IMF not raise this earlier, and why are they doing it now? Because earlier, America's debt was considered safe, and for good reason. The US has never defaulted on its loans. It has the world's biggest currency, the USD, which is also the world's reserve currency. And this allowed the US government to get away with a lot. But today, US debt looks risky. And one major reason for that is the interest. Let me show you some numbers from last month. Every 100 days, the US has added $1 trillion to its debt. In other words, every 3 months, America's debt has increased by $1 trillion, so much so that now their interest payments are bigger than their defense budget. This year alone, the US will pay $870 billion as interest on loans. $870 billion is the interest. Do you know what their defense budget is? $822 billion. And this high interest on loans is increasing America's debt. It's a bit like getting a home loan. Say you borrow money to buy an apartment. Now, most home loans come with a floating interest rate, meaning they can fluctuate depending upon the economic climate. The interest rate goes up or down. So you start repaying the loan. After paying your EMIs for a few years, you check your loan account only to be shocked. You will find that your debt has hardly reduced. You've been paying your EMIs on time, yet you have a significant debt burden after years of payment because the bank has been recovering the interest all this while. And this is a classic debt trap situation. When you borrow a large amount, your income does not rise and the interest fluctuates. When all of these three things happen, chances are your debts will increase. And the US government is in a similar situation. Top American bankers are concerned, like Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, or Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, and BlackRock CEO Larry Fink. They're all concerned about America's growing debt. Also, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the US Federal Reserve, consider what he said earlier this year. I'm quoting, "It's now time or past time to get back to an adult conversation among elected officials about getting the federal government back on a sustainable fiscal path." And this advice makes sense. He wants the US government to reduce expenses and find ways to increase its income and start reducing its debt pile. This is common sense, but so far Washington has not been able to move in this direction. They don't even seem inclined to. Every year, Democrats and Republicans clash with each other over the debt limit. That's the legal borrowing limit for the US government, the debt ceiling. Every year, the US government finds itself on the brink of a shutdown. There's a clash over this debt ceiling, and after a few rounds of back and forth, they always resort to more debt to keep America running. American politicians seem to have only one strategy: run their government by borrowing more. But going forward, they will have to course correct and contain the debt because the stability of the US economy and potentially the global economy depends on it.